So this morning, we're going to be talking about the mushroom and the mycelia. And this is a title which I think can be interpreted in a variety of ways, very literally as the organisms themselves, but as we will see as well going through the presentation, also in terms of the sort of metaphoric potential that it gives to us. And I'm realizing now that I actually can't see the notes, so I'm going to have to wing it a little bit, Elena, so you can keep me on track. We are going to be having a lot of time this morning today, for group discussion, but we do want to start out with a 30-minute presentation. It takes roughly 30 minutes because we want to just make sure that we all are on the same page with the sort of starting point for the discussion today. And Elena and I have been working on a literature review, which we think is particularly helpful for exploring and explaining how we are understanding the task that we have proposed here. Then, because we have a relatively small group, I think we can do a fair bit of this work together, but we want to spend the next 30 minutes maybe in two groups talking about why we would want a new image in our CERN community and what do we want the image for. So these are, I think, from my perspective, two important starting points in embarking on this kind of work, because to some extent it's akin to a research question, but I think it's also just important to keep in mind that more than a theoretical or conceptual exercise, I really want something that I can use that will help lend explanatory power to my own research. Then we may be able to sort of skip the medium breakout groups and just come back together into one group where we can talk about what we had started writing and started thinking about. We can sort of decide how we want to manage this as we go. But we have the Google Jamboards set up for two breakout groups to start drafting different images, and then we can come back together, or we can just do that all together. We'll see how what makes most sense for us. So we want to start off just with, since we don't know who is here and what our various experiences are, just sort of checking in with what I would argue is the most widely known figure from the community economies sort of figure lexicon, if that's a thing. And that's definitely the iceberg. What you see here on the slide are two different versions. The early version of the iceberg from 2000, well, let's just say the early version of the iceberg, which is making me realize I didn't introduce myself very thoroughly. And then the later version, just from a couple of years back, which was sort of, as you can see in the image, including now a lot more different categories and ways of thinking about economic relations and value production and value exchange that have grown out of the work that the Community Economies Institute and members of the CERN community have been doing. So I want to show that, and also this slide, to just exemplify that there is room and I think also interest in exploring and expressing the community economies theory and approach to in different ways and in different sort of visuals, depending on the communities that we are trying to work with and the goals and aims of our work. And so here is just a snapshot of two of the different sort of community economies images or adaptations of the iceberg from an organization on rethinking the economy that is really trying to do this work. You can see the caption of the video shot of their website in the top left, which is accessible through the CERN website. Okay, so now I want to turn to a presentation that Elena and I have put together for a recent geography meeting, which was just in the last couple of weeks, which maybe it was last week, but which we, in talking about it, realized would also be a very useful way of getting us into this discussion. And maybe this is now a better time to sort of take a brief pause and just introduce myself a little more. Because I think that the presentation that we're doing here for me was an important part, development of some work that I've been doing for the last 7 years or so on this concept of emplacement. So I am currently an associate professor at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in the geography department. And I came here from University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm American. And when I was in Oshkosh, we started to work together as members of the environmental studies department to try to do a collective research project, something that could branch across our different fields, because we were coming from history, philosophy, geography, biology. So we wanted to do something collectively, and the idea of place-based sustainability is kind of what we landed on. And so we worked to kind of think about what that would mean. And for me, as a member of the Community Economies collective since approximately 2005, I've been involved and engaged in this kind of work. I immediately thought about the sort of political potential and the sort of opening up of possibilities language that is in the diverse economies literature. And so kind of following the ethical coordinates from the post-capitalist politics, we thought through this idea of ethical considerations in a place-based sustainability. And this paper for me is about unpacking one of those ethical considerations, which is this idea of community, because in placement, we understand that community extends beyond humans. But what that looks like is something that I'm very grateful to be working with Elena on, because there's a lot of different ways to think through community. And so what we did was we set out our task to examine what material potentials are created through a discursive shift from an exclusive focus on human communities to something else, which is what we're trying to understand. And we wanted to then unpack and understand the politics of language, again, coming from post-capitalist politics, behind what many people call more than human discourses, but in fact, our task is to investigate a little bit more the different options there. And so we are working on sort of determining a linguistic framework for our current research. So for me, the emplacement framework, and then Elena will mention about how this is part of her work in just a minute, to think about who counts as community, or who are the actors. What do actors do that justifies community membership? And what do presumably diverse actors gain by being framed as community members? Because for us, these are sort of the three criteria which we determined that we wanted to then examine a wide range of literature on. So in the literature, we have encountered, and just in our sort of academic experiences, we've encountered many ideas about who counts as community, which extend beyond the standard sort of entry point for most people, which is humans, to add animals, plants, fungi, and microbes, which is then most other living things on the planet. And in some of this language and literature, we see then an extension of community also towards the landscape itself, so rivers, mountains, and the land. And there are lots of different ways to group these entities, ranging from the more ecological and technical towards the more sort of conceptual and fluid that you see at the bottom of the list here. And these come through a range of relationships. So we identified ways to understand the relationships from ecology up through anthropology, geography, environmental humanities, so that you see sort of going from these ideas of interspecies relations, which is fairly similar to ecology, towards entanglements and interdependencies, which is much more the language of environmental humanities. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to Elena and just mention that the only thing I can see is the slides again, so just let me know when you want to move on, Elena.
Okay, sounds good. Right, so this is part of my work, this project with Za here now, and the presentation that we gave recently. I don't remember when it was. There's been so much happening this week and last week, but very recently. And so it's definitely an ongoing project, ongoing literature review that's about a month old in its thinking at this point. But it's coming from, I'm showing a slide here that's just giving a quick overview of what kind of literature we might be talking about. So I'm framing it as a state of the art literature review from the last 5 years. Definitely coming from geography, where we're both sitting at the university, but also anthropology and the humanities, urban planning, environmental humanities, political ecology, a bit of social practice theory stuff, and of course, community economies work as well. This will be a part of my PhD project, which Za is the supervisor for and is on foraging in Norway. You can go ahead to the next slide. So where I'm at with this thinking with Za is still pretty young, but what I would like to show you in the next couple slides is just some cross-cutting ways that I'm sorting out this literature, and then to give some illustrative examples of those cross-cutting themes. So it's definitely not supposed to be systematic or all-inclusive, but maybe just to get the mind thinking in this way before we break out into groups. So in the literature, kind of as a baseline, it says that more than humans matter. So we have a couple concepts that we could unpack here: econosociality and earth care labor. Za, you can go ahead and speak about econosociality.
So econosociality is a concept coming from Gibson, Graham, and Rolvink in 2009, and it sort of engages with this idea of interbeing between our sort of economic selves and our social selves. And the focus certainly is still on the sort of processes of production. And so what I've put on the slide here are 2 images from the colleagues of mine from the recent Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or IPBES, assessment on the sustainable use of wild species, which is something I've been involved in for the last 4 years. And the image on the left is a gentleman in the Amazon harvesting a pirikuru, which is as you see, quite a large river fish species, which was a kind of a sustainable overuse, a sort of over-harvesting disaster, which has come back very successfully to be more of a sustainable use exemplar. And then the one in the middle is from another gentleman in the Himalayas collecting cordyceps mushrooms, widely known as the caterpillar fungus, which is traded internationally as a medicinal fungus. And I selected these 2 images because I think they demonstrate nicely the relationships that people create with the species around them, which both give them livelihoods, but also a closer sense of relationship and community with their landscapes and the species which occur in them.
Right, and the third picture here on the right reads, "Stop the genocide, long live the Indios, the rivers, and the trees." And this last photo is from the extractivistas in Brazil, who are rubber tappers and wild fruit gatherers. And they have shown that they've been willing to fight and even die for the forests that they live off and with. So Stefania Barker was inspired by this group with her concept Earth Care Labor. With this concept Earth Care Labor, it's written in a book called Forces of Reproduction. And she's pointing out that labors of reproduction of the earth itself are often undervalued in comparison to labors of production. When we're thinking of industrial production as being, and progress as being a big part of the push forward of humanity, rather than this care work. So she's extending that care work not to just human lives, but to care for the earth. And she points out that labors of environmental justice movements, solidarity movements, indigenous movements, and even gardening and other ways of caring for and having relationships with more than humans are valid work that she makes some terminology for. So in this work, she's and the others are framing the earth as alive and worth caring for. And then moving on to some literature that takes another step further, saying that these more than humans, not only do they matter, but they're doing work. Oh, you're muted.
Elena, do you have access to the notes?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, can you maybe just read the notes? Because I feel like there's some good some material in there on the economic ecologies that I just cannot articulate at the moment.
Do you want me to send you your notes?
No, it won't help. I mean, I can start and then maybe you can see if there's other things I wrote at another time. So yeah, so because I think Elena's pushing me to talk about this because this is an idea that I had written about. Oh gosh, I don't remember when we first did it, but it was, oh, look at that. I think everyone else can still see the slides, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. You are so smart. This is like the thing with Isaac's screen. It's like collectively supporting each other in technology. So yeah, so okay, so in the previous slides we talked about sort of human labor and the relationship between humans and their communities of species around them, but there's actually this emerging literature on more than human labor as well. And in our sort of re-envisioning of community, we want to talk about sort of the connections that more than humans have with each other as much as the connections that humans and more than humans have. So through the decentering of sort of capitalist terms like owner or materials and the decentering of the human subject, with the rejection of this totalizing separation between humans and the environment, we see that we can begin to reshape community through these processes of shared work. And so instead, we see that the sort of intimate relationships can be understood as what I had coined as econo-ecologies, which focus on partnership, engagement, and practice. And so in the images, we see ant farming, a cork tree, a forest growing food, and lichens and fungi providing the base for dyes, for yarn. And with the exception of the first photo, all of these demonstrate sort of a collaborative work between humans and earth others. But we wanted to sort of include them here because in the chapter that I wrote with my colleague Jackie Hess in the handbook, we write about the labor of earth others as having value both relationally and in more normative terms as ecosystem services. And we talk about how ecosystem services actually originated as a kind of concept that was not capitalistic, but was more about the sort of relationality in terms of service. And so we're trying to some extent get back to that, but then understand that it's not about one set of species being in service to another, but if we can understand that more in a more sort of equal way, then it's about the work that they do in partnership. Yes.
Right, in partnership and even without including humans, like in your first example with the ant. Yes, ant and soil. So more than humans they matter, they do work, and they also shape human work. And this is drawing on an article by Bryce, who's working in Australian viticulture research. Not the worst field work, I would say. And he's arguing how grapevines themselves, he uses the term planty agency. They have their own planty agency. And by that, he means that they have influence over when us humans do our work with grapes. We're subjected to their growth cycles, not only over decades and hundreds of years, but even within variations on a year and even tighter basis. We have to be in tune to exactly when they're ripe. And that also gets us into connection with larger Earth system processes like climate and weather. He goes so far as to say that grapevines are, quote, active participants in patterning social time. And more than shaping human work, more than humans are also building livelihoods. So in Miller's book, Ethan Miller has a book that's called Reimagining Livelihoods. And he's pretty tired of hearing that the world consists of an ecological sphere, a social sphere, and an economic sphere. And instead, he proposes what he, in his conclusion, kind of humorously says are more challenging to remember terms, 3 more challenging to remember terms, but perhaps more descriptive of how life really unfolds. So instead of, or let's say, he says at the center of the way that we're negotiating sustainable livelihoods is creation of livelihoods themselves, or ecopoiesis, habitat building. And that's consisting of what he calls providing, making a living for others, or alterpoiesis. But not only do we have others provide for us in the creation of our livelihoods, we provide for others as well, of course, which he calls being made by others, receiving, and this is allopoiesis. I think I kind of explained that a bit strange. Providing is alterpoiesis and receiving allopoiesis. And then of course, there's things that we're doing for ourselves, things that we're making, and that's referring to autopoiesis. Thanks for dropping in and sharing the reference, Carrie. I'll call it out later. So here he's shifting from a sort of static description of economy, ecology, and sociality to this inherently relational view of things, of cohabitat building, of action based in community with others. So he's saying life is centered around community. Community consists of all sorts of creatures, and together we build livelihoods. And this is just maybe where Carrie would have been excited and wanting to contribute. There's some literature coming from maybe everybody's side of the world. I'm not sure where everyone, Moy is over here with us, but from Australia. And yes, so this is framing more than humans as active in world-making practices. So a research collective in Australia sees that knowledge is coming from the land herself, and this is an idea drawing from, in this example, the Yolngu concept of co-becoming, which sees everything as knowledgeable and thus everyone as teachers. So it's through relationship with the living land and all of its inhabitants that these knowledge systems have been built up in this community. And the research collective lists Bawaka country, where this community is living, as the first author on multiple academic papers. So they argue that the concept of co-becoming has something that's really rich to offer to a field which is called natural resource management. And not least of that is the ability to remember that we all come from the land as ancestor, and thus so do our knowledges. And the reference that Carrie showed is looking, I'm just opening it now, and it's looking quite parallel, but from a different place, also in Australia. Drawing on, the title was Embracing Country as Teacher in Outdoor and Environmental Education. So we'll definitely take a look there. And then finally, there's some work that's stretching the idea of humans being in community with more than humans to say, well, maybe humans are ourselves more than human. Maybe you guys have heard the fun fact that we're more bacterial cells than we are human cells by tenfold. So the question that follows from that naturally is, where do humans stop and where do other creatures actually begin? And along similar thought lines is literature on multi-species urbanism, which says that, quote, our relational selves and bodies are the urban ecosystems, and our urban ecosystems are our embodied selves. So this might sound like we're getting pretty conceptual and off the ground, but I just wanted to point out that Deborah Solomon, shown here, is presenting her work at the conference called Feral, and she's using this terminology in conversation with the municipality in Amsterdam to change their mowing practices in the city. So behind her is a picture of a place that she has been able to argue for the living neighbors that are impacted positively when they're not mowed down in their seeding season. So in other words, the language of animation is affecting real more than humans on the ground in Europe. Yeah, so across the literature, we've got quite some animating terms. More than humans, non-humans, earth, others, carry, shared. I've already lost it in my mind. It was earthkin, biota, interspecies relations, multi-species communities, relational ecologies, entanglements, or as Harvey puts it, the world is full of persons, but few of them are human. And so part of the work of conceptualizing more than human communities involves moving from just naming who's in the community to actually activating, and moving from nouns in that way to verbs. So I'm going to read some of the buzzwords here from the literature. They are verbs. They're hiding themselves as nouns because in academia, we love to nominalize, turn verbs into nouns. So I'll read them out as if they were left as verbs. So when we're caring for the environment, we manage ecosystem services, we conserve and restore and regenerate. We use wild species sustainably. We serve as stewards for the environment. We work for the care of the earth. We keep the world alive and healthy. And we produce human and more than human communities. And I just wanted to show this snippet of a cartoon from the nib. I think it's a great image to kind of get our brains warmed up for hopefully drawing some images together today. It's just a short cartoon, and in this part of the cartoon, it says, in thriving soil, protozoa and bacteria are busy building bustling communities. Yeah, so I think the last note on this slide is just that no matter how you call it, what we're talking about here is caring for communities that include humans, but not only. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Elena. So I think we have plenty of time now, and maybe the nice thing to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and just take a round and hear people's thoughts and reactions to the presentation. And then we can move into thinking about what we might want to get out of a figure. But yeah, just open the floor for anyone to sort of reflect on what we've done so far.
Okay, I'd say, I mean, this is, for me, it's a step outside of my, outside of what I've studied. I think my work has always been anthropocentric, really, mainly anyway. I liked the conclusion in saying that rather than naming who's in a more than human community, or how do you say, an ecosystem partnership. I kind of like that concept as opposed to ecosystem service, but move from naming to nouns. I liked that. I'm wondering how then if we move to some, another form of iceberg representation, albeit, a fungi with roots and things under the ground, if we name words such as manage, conserve, restore, sustain, and so on, what are we doing that's really different to the iceberg, or in terms of what we're pointing out? I mean, it sounds to me like we are doing that labor of care and restore and sustaining for the earth as we might do it for the economy. I mean, I guess that's the difference, but it's they would still look quite similar to me. I think it would just be an alternative way of saying, well, we care for the economy, we repair the economy, we maintain the economy, we sustain the economy, we keep the commons, we have ethical deliberation. That's the work that I'm probably more familiar with in my own research. We could switch to a modern human ontology and say, well, we perform these tasks to care for earthkin and the earth itself and the land we live on. That would seem to me to be the kind of, I'm just wondering how you go beyond that to represent something that isn't just a kind of mirror image of caring for the economy, albeit, a representation of mycelium with the same kind of ethics. I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with just saying that's an alternative take on, the impetus is how we care for the economy. The impetus is how we care for, or how we extend the economy anyway, how we see the land itself as drawing from Ethan Miller, we can't separate ecology and livelihood. We can't separate the economy from the environment anyway. So the justification for that representation, I think, would just be a complement to kind of support what Ethan has been saying, which is that that you can't separate these things. So it's just another representation of the same ethos, the same ethics, the same practices of care, just presented in a more earthly sense, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely have some thoughts about that, but I think we'll just keep it open for others. Emma, Nikolai, Moy, Pryor, who's gonna jump in?
I'll jump in. I enjoyed that. Thank you. I'm definitely in this space, and the material felt familiar, and there were a couple of new words that particularly Ethan's stuff, I hadn't come across that before, so that was really interesting to hear in terms of livelihoods and how that was represented. I'm currently at this point after having read with a reading group here in New Zealand, Jamie Lorimer's work on A Probiotic Planet, which thinks about human as holobiont, this complex organism that's made up of all these different species. So we're actually, as you were talking about organisms in ourselves and how we have this multi-species sort of interdependence. And what I've been thinking about kind of more recently is, because I like that kind of conceptual stuff. So we have these ethical coordinates that we are able to determine and negotiate as human. But in the more than human worlds, which, in Aotearoa and other places, Aotearoa in New Zealand, sorry for an international audience, we think about, without trying to falsely divide nature and humans, but thinking about nature with personhood, for example, particular mountains or rivers. Those ethical coordinates that we consider as humans, whether we give over that same kind of obligation to more than human others and assume that they have a set of ethical coordinates, or we interpret their care, that reciprocal care of working with us, as something that's ethical when it's something that's less of a choice. It's, yeah. Anyway, so that's what I've been sort of tinkering with more recently, and how that care that's being delivered by more than human others in some ways seems indiscriminate. Yeah, that's what I've kind of been thinking. Anyway, I'll stop there. Let others jump in.
Thank you, Emma. That's really interesting.
I can go.
Great.
I think this is fantastic. I mean, my work is on the more than human and wine, and I think I very much pick up sort of where Jeremy Bryce and Anna Shibashinska left off. But yeah, we talked about this in the winter school as well, Zara, in the session that you ran. I think it's really, there is sort of a need for a figure that represents more than human work and labor and values. And just as sort of the previous literature was often quite capitalocentric, I think a lot of work now is quite anthropocentric still. And I guess more to Isaac's point, you're not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but you're sort of creating a new page and saying that this is sort of a new definition of the iceberg model. And I think you could definitely have something slightly more circuitous or embedded, or, you know, I think the iceberg's quite, I don't know, linear in a way. But yeah, it's interesting. You, like Bryce and Shibashinska, they both looked at not only plants and microbes, but also materials. So Bryce looked at technology and Shibashinska at like sulfur. And so thinking about the vitality of materials is almost a different project from the sort of human environment relations, and takes it in a different direction. But that's something interesting to think about.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, great. Prior, please.
Yep, I can really relate with the presentation, and it's really terrific to hear your thoughts, Za and Elena, because I've been doing research on the lively materiality of concrete and building materials, and kind of in the last space of my doctoral research, I was looking at the potentiality of plant-based building materials, kind of revaluing them in light of the dominance of concrete in the construction and building industry in the Philippines. So this kind of looking at the entanglements of more than humans and humans is really something that I can relate to. And maybe going back to the representation of the iceberg economy, I was thinking that I mean, it's something that can be kind of added more, because I think the visual is really just focusing on the iceberg, but not the larger context where the iceberg is present. I'm thinking that, you know, if it's considering the more than humans, there should be an idea of where the planktons are, or some of the, you know, non-human organisms that are other organisms that are present in the actual ecology of the iceberg, both at the atmosphere and also at the bottom of the sea, maybe also trash that are floating in the ocean. So those are the kind of other things that could really kind of represent the diversity of actants that are contributing to the economy or the ecology in that sense. I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Prior. Moy, do you want to jump in with anything?
Yes. For me, this is kind of a little bit outside what I've been studying before, but I still think that it is a very useful terminology or framework that you are working on. So I have some notes. Let me just find them. So what I really was thinking about was earlier today, I was in this another Liviana room with Healy, where he talked about psych and survival in times of climate breakdown. And there was he was talking about some wildfires in Australia that have wiped out, I think he said 1 billion animals. And with that comes also like a ton of species and different types of growth. So I was just thinking that we would have done so much more for the climate if it was 1 billion people, right? If it was 1 billion people wiped out by that fire. So I just think that the more than human needs to be accounted for on larger scale than what it is today. And I'm working on a CERN now in my internship, and I've found it so hard to value these more than human variables because there isn't really that much focus on it in the capitalistic world that we see today. So I really think that, it's really nice hearing about work that's been done to actually make it easier and what can I say, but that accounts for it on a larger scale, if that made sense. Sorry, it's a little bit late here, so I'm fumbling a little bit, but yeah, hope that made sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think, yeah, that's a really nice sort of way to think about where this work might contribute further is in the sort of CERN, because I know Moy. So just for those that don't know, Moy's one of my students that's currently working with Kelly in New Zealand. So she's my plant to like learn everything that you guys are doing down there and then come back and teach us all this good stuff. So I really like this idea that, you know, there's really practical kind of on the ground stuff going on with the CERN in New Zealand, which you're going to sort of bring back and teach us how to do here. And that this more than human work that Elena and I are doing could then tie into that as well, because it gives it sort of an immediate, in my mind, sort of very practical application. So I think that's really cool. And I think these are some great comments and connect so nicely to the comments that we had in the previous session as well. What I'd like to do is take a 10-minute bio break and then come back, and then we still have an hour or however much of that time that we want to use to think about how to start to visualize the different comments and different thoughts that we're having, and just follow up on some of the discussion. I'm taking notes here, and I do want to mention that before we go, the plan is that I'm going to now write up the notes from both sessions and send them around to those that are interested. And I think probably on the larger CERN list, just recognizing that not everyone could be at these sessions, that we will send out some information and the notes on the sessions with some information about our intentions on how to take this work forward, and have an open call to the community for those that want to be involved, and understanding kind of at what level people want to be involved, potentially with the aim of a publication. I think very much not just potentially with the aim of a publication, and it's to be determined who will be the author, if the institute itself will be like one of the authors, or if it will be like the list of individuals. So that's where we're headed with this. So you can think a little bit about that, and I'll see you back here at the top of the hour. Thank you. Go ahead and resume. There, look at that. So on time. Okay. Thanks, Prior. So welcome back, everyone. I had a nice little break saying goodbye to my daughter, who's on her way to school now. So now I also then took a second to put the link to our Jamboard in the chat. And this is going to be our little collective workspace. And really, I just want to invite folks to comfortably, share whatever makes sense to them. I'm going to take the liberty of drawing a little line across, because in the spirit of the iceberg, we are imagining that there are many elements to what we're interested in that we previously had unseen or not visualized. And so the idea of the mushroom and the mycelia is that we see the mushroom and we don't see the mycelia, and that there are many aspects of a community and relationality that are unseen that we want to try to illuminate. So I just wanted to take a brief minute, and as people are sort of getting familiar with the Jamboard, is there anybody that has never used this before? Yep. Okay, so basically it's like an online whiteboard, and we're sort of collectively drawing a slide together, and there are different tools on the left side. There's different widths of pens and like a highlighter and a marker and stuff. And there's a small color palette. And then there's an eraser, and you can also add sticky notes, and you can import images. You can create shapes and text boxes. And there's also this little laser function if you just want to sort of show people something like, look at this thing, and then it disappears. So there's a nice range of options, and we just work together on it and sort of co-create in the space. And then I think what we'll do is just stay on one together and then sort of see where we get. I know that in the last session, one of the groups sort of made multiple slides as their thinking progressed. So that's certainly an option as well. But just reflecting a little bit on some of the comments, I wanted to add that I think one of the points that came from the last session, which really helped me think about how we might differentiate a figure that we want to create now from the iceberg, was the idea that the iceberg is more static, and that each part of the iceberg represents to some extent a discrete value exchange, or a discrete form of value exchange. And part of what we're thinking about here in our rethinking of the community still is about value exchange and about interactions, but it's more relational. And so it includes a sort of a development and a sense of relationality and movement that the iceberg doesn't really show. And I think that that's somewhat similar to some of the comments from you, Nikolai, and prior about kind of the linearity of the iceberg, and also the way that the iceberg doesn't really account for the things that are around it. So in thinking through a mycelial network, we have the opportunity to attach different things or nestle different things in between the mycelia. The mycelia can kind of grow into other places. And so as we are thinking about it, at least in our conversation so far, Elena and I are thinking about it very much in relational terms, and in terms of what kinds of relationships would be ongoing, and the fact that humans maybe are coming in at the top with mushrooms and collecting the mushrooms, but that relationship between the mushroom and the term I like is earth other, although I really like this term earth kin as well. So the relationship between, the human and the mushroom is very clear to us, but the relationships underground that support that relationship are not visible or not clear to us. And there was also a comment, I think, from you, Emma, about infrastructure and technologies. And so another aspect of this that we want to think about is in an image, do we want to focus only on earth kin or things that are alive, or do we want to extend that as well to, a huge range of maybe natural abiotic elements of the environment, or then also these additional sort of entities in our worlds like concrete. And I know like Eric Sarmiento did this whole thing on coolers some years ago, and So, you know, Elena has this example of like these little Roomba vacuum cleaners that are like little robots that clean your house and stuff. So, you know, for me, I would draw a line there and not include these just for lack of a better term at the moment, non-natural elements. I'm starting to kind of open up to the idea of maybe including the river and the land and these things. But the Roomba is too far for me. So, yeah, so that's kind of some of my thoughts.
Za, would you like to draw your ideas of this mushroom and mycelia to get started?
Yeah.
There
So-
seems to be a nice metaphor for this new diagram, that it's like grounded in soil and rooted in place, whereas
Mhm.
the iceberg is floating free in this sort of empty, expansive ocean. I quite like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So when we think of the fact that the soil is not empty, what kind of my question for myself is always, what is included in this drawing? If it's not empty space, if it's soil, how do we depict the soil? Who's there and what are they doing? And oh, nice. That's great.
This is my AM version of a morel, which is not going so well, I have to say. Hmm.
And anyone can feel free to jump in. So if you have an idea of what's happening under the surface, you can just choose a color and start drawing. And you can, if it feels good, we can all just take our microphones off. So if you have an idea, you can just say it out. Or sorry, take our microphones on. So that it's, yeah, you don't have to wait for a good moment to speak at this point.
Yeah, I think some people will think this looks like a tree, which is also okay, I guess.
I think I'm gonna try to draw a human involved in all this. Just the other day, Za and I drew a claw hand.
Yeah, that was really bad.
But I actually liked the idea for just like acknowledging that humans are coming to pick this.
Yeah,
If I can do any better with a hand using this mouse pad.
I have to say that little claw troubled me so much I redrew it into a hand later.
Did you?
Yeah, I was like, this claw thing is no good. I just can't have this. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I really like about the mycelial network is that it really is supporting all, like, I mean, 90% of trees on the planet could not live without their mycelial support, which I just think is so amazing. That's the thing about fungi. It's like once you start to learn about them, you're just like you just converted. Is that a nematode? Did someone draw a yellow nematode? Nice.
Sure, that's what it was.
Definitely a nematode.
Kind of undefined.
Yeah.
Invertebrate.
That's somebody mentioned Jamie Lorimer. He had that paper about like, what about the nematodes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what should be in here? Tardigrades.
Oh,
But
yeah.
there's so little. Okay, I'm gonna draw one. Ready?
Yeah.
It's gonna be green. They're so tiny.
Yeah, they're really tiny. Except that one in that Star Trek show.
Those are tardigrades.
There's something nice here that it's not bordered as well. It's not bounded.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah. I don't know. I'm on this metaphor train still, but rather than being contained, it's sort of.
Okay, in the spirit of that, Nikolai, here's half a worm. On its way out of the screen. Here's another one.
Nice.
Just captured your thought in words over here as well. Unbounded numbers.
That made me think of Médecins Sans Frontières. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but Earthkin without borders.
Yeah. I like that.
That'd be a thing.
That definitely needs a sticky.
Now, do we need soil horizons? I'm gonna draw some soil
Ooh,
horizons.
that's interesting.
What color?
Yeah, I'm gonna make. Oh, yeah. It's too bad there's no like. The color palette's quite limited here. Maybe make a low.
My partner actually works for Doctors Without Borders, and when he was growing up, he thought that it was Doctors Without Boundaries.
Hmm.
So he imagined like crazy doctors that didn't have any boundaries.
I don't
Like
really
social
want to have that
boundaries?
doctor.
No, I think he imagined a doctor with a chainsaw or something. Not sure how that relates here.
Really want my doctor to have healthy boundaries.
Yeah. Maybe this is a mycelium with healthy boundaries.
Hmm.
I wonder how far will the network, will it extend up to the aquifer, the groundwater?
This is compost, if you couldn't tell.
Where's the compost?
I think I can use the laser. Is it here?
It's the blue, it's a banana and a leaf, but
Oh, okay.
Decomposition.
Oh yeah.
yeah.
I like the idea of the groundwater underneath somewhere.
Yeah, I'll just draw blue.
Yes.
Nice. I'm trying to think about what's in these sort of little zones. Are these soil clods?
Potatoes?
Rocks.
Potatoes. Rocks?
Rocks.
Yeah. Okay. Nice.
I kind of don't like that the only thing that the human seems to be doing is taking.
Maybe it's giving.
Yeah.
Maybe it's tending.
Yeah, but with mushrooms, you usually just take it.
Yeah. Well, no, but I mean, I don't know how this is in the image, but I would say that a lot of mushroom harvesters that I have interviewed for my research, they would soak the mushrooms and then take the stems and the water that they think has the spores in it and take it back to the forest to pour out.
Yeah, I've seen this also with a woman on Glöshagen campus, just on the campus near here, where she was picking and then using a type of basket that had a lot of holes and then shaking the spores out over certain places so she could come back and harvest them.
Yeah, I mean, biologically, it doesn't really work like that, but it's a nice idea.
I don't know if it's possible to draw it in the picture, but is it worth putting in there that this can't happen if it's not left alone? That it actually needs a space to grow. So if we just pour concrete all over, you won't have all of the things.
Hmm.
So, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I have no idea how to put it in there, but just that it has to be left alone in order to grow.
Or not necessarily left alone, but somehow respected.
Yeah, not damaged, maybe.
This is
Yeah,
also
do no
like,
harm.
poisonous varieties of mushroom that could
Yeah.
kind of repel people from getting them.
Hi, Sadie. Oh, it's so great to see you. I invited Sadie very last minute yesterday afternoon to see if she would want to join this session.
Thank you
Hello.
for
So great
inviting
that
me.
you
I
would
saw
make
the
it.
invitation over breakfast this morning, so I'm sorry to have missed first part.
No, that's great. Sadie was a part of a conversation we basically gave a very similar presentation this morning as at NGS, where Sadie was, and had some amazing feedback, and so I invited. Now we're moving on to drawing. I'm not sure. Maybe Za, you can help me introduce what we're doing right now.
So we are, if you want to click on the link in the chat, we are playing in a Google Jamboard space. It's not there maybe since you just joined.
No, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I don't see anything.
Yeah, no problem. I will resend.
Just on that discussion of the mushroom being left alone, I'm not sure if you guys have read Anna Singh's The Mushroom at the End of the World and stuff on post-capitalist politics. But there she talks about mushrooms being like flourishing in sites of ruin. So where there has been deliberate human intervention, and sometimes, you know, the salvage that needs to take place as a result. So it's interesting that there can be this dependency as well, and that particular mushrooms. Sorry, I'm not sure if you were saying this at the end of that bit of conversation. My daughter just came in and distracted me, but maybe, you know, particular tree, for example, in Aotearoa, we have European trees that are planted deliberately to grow truffles. So there's like these deliberate experiences that rely on intervention. Yeah, I don't know. I was just thinking about that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that mushrooms and mushroom producing fungi are often used for bioremediation because they can concentrate a lot of what we would consider basically like harmful elements, and they absorb them into the mushroom itself. So they absorb them into the mycelia, and then they put them into the mushroom as a sort of like a soil cleansing process. So yeah, I think that I haven't read all of that book because I haven't had the time in this space, but I think it definitely is kind of I think in her work she uses a lot of fungi for metaphor stuff. But in terms of the sort of biological capacity of it is definitely sort of another way to think about, you know, what are options and potentials that, you know, mushrooms have with their greater environment, right? And the surroundings.
Yeah, and also it reminds me of this literature on weird ecologies, which I didn't present today. I think I saw you smile. Have you read it, Emma, or are you aware of it? No, okay.
I've just heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still oh great, Siri, I'm glad you're in. It's probably very hard, Siri, to understand what is happening right now, but maybe maybe we can take a minute and explain. But just on weird ecologies, it's I'm just touching a toe into it, but from my understanding, or at least what I think it adds to the discussion, is this kind of richness of if you're born now and you're entering ecologies that aren't, you know, I think a lot of people feel that young people are missing out in a way on these like pure nature conceptions that of what is seen as, you know, kind of the past, and there's no longer that experience, and flowers are blooming at different times than they're kind of supposed to, and a lot of humanness is just mixed in because we have very few forests that haven't been planted, for example. So what we think of as going into the forest in the Netherlands, for example, or a lot of places in the States, it's the forest for sure, but it's a completely different forest than maybe most of humans experienced. Or let's say most of humans in historical time or in prehistorical time. So I think Weird Ecologies is trying to like own that and step into that space with like this idea that we don't, like, this is still our ecologies, and how do we just call them weird instead of like completely worthless or destroyed, or this kind of, yeah, this is the way that I've understood it. Making sense of that change for the benefit of the next generations, but also for the benefit of the people living through the changes, as a way of like adapting to the situation as it is.
It's got a hopefulness to it.
Yeah, weird hopefulness. It's kind of a creepy body of literature, but it is a bit creepy, but it's also very hopeful in that creepiness. It reminds me of like sovereignty movements in the food sovereignty world, where it's like the one of the quotes is, the poor don't have a chance to be hopeless, like they only have the chance to continue and persist, and only those that have more than they need have the chance to be hopeless in that way. Yeah, it just reminds me of that kind of.
But it is, yeah, that's interesting to say that it's kind of a more helpful, because I guess it is a little more helpful than the sort of like post-natural, end of nature kind of unnatural sort of language that, like, you know, and people sort of like, I don't remember the piece, but Zizek had that whole like trash is nature thing some years ago, and you know, that I think for a lot of people was like, really, is this our future? You know, so what I'm wondering about with the image, which is like, I think really cool and fun coming together, is I keep trying to think about all the different terms that we've been talking about and playing with, and community members, and is there a way to kind of animate the kind of our nature image? Is it, who's drawing chemical composition?
That's me. I was thinking about it's usually like fiber and sawdust and woody pulp and stuff like that in the soil.
Yeah.
So I was trying to kind of represent some kind of carbon form, or like, yeah, or kind of form of woody fiber or something like that.
Cool.
What do they call it? Lignin or something? Lignin?
Yeah, lignin.
Yeah, lignin.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that that's pretty much essential for growing mushrooms if you want to grow them. So
Yeah, they need the
anyway.
cellulose.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll put a sticky note on it.
Yeah, I moved the poisonous mushroom sticky because I had drawn an Amanita muscaria, so now it's just near the. Now it's near there.
Speaking of terms, have you guys thought? Sorry, dying. Thought through like rhizomes in the Deleuzian sense?
I personally have kind of stayed away from that because it is so like kind of
Deleuzian.
yeah. Thank you, Emma. Yes. but it certainly is, conceptually it's connected there. But I think, for me, I didn't say this earlier, but like I also have really struggled with this more than human term. I don't like it, because I feel that it is a false humility that sort of shows that, oh, we are just mere humans in the world, and all the other things are more than human and better and more, because they can't be evil, and they do their things with, kind of like what you were talking about a little bit, Emma, about what is the sort of agency that we are putting on these other organisms to some extent, and how is it that we we are choosing and they are not choosing, and so I feel that kind of more than human language, it doesn't, to me, acknowledge the very intense and active role that humans have, and also that we are speaking amongst ourselves and as we try to work these things out. So yeah, I usually have been using the term earth other. I like this term earthkin, Isaac, because it does focus on the living as opposed to everyone and everything. And certainly for me personally, that's where my interest is.
It's also better than other, don't you think? I kind of prefer it to other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Framing it in alterity straight away. Yeah, that's not a great starting point.
Yeah, right.
There's other.
Othering's got so much baggage coming out of like race studies and gender studies.
Yeah, I think that was the issue I had with both more than human and earth others, is that it's still kind of centering the human, even in its attempt to decenter the human, and it's hard to get away from that. I think earthkin is I've just been using like living beings, but I think earthkin opens up a lot of doors and immediately centers that we're related to each other in a way that living beings might not, in the specific, I mean, the term kin there shows relationship.
Yeah.
I like earthkin because that this argument about, well, it's not an argument, but the discussion rather about animate and not inanimate beings to include, because all my work is on soil, and when I think about rocks as being the parent material for soil, I can't get away from the inanimate nature of what's the relationality between the soil. Hold on, I'm about to be attacked by my 4-year-old. Yeah, sorry, I'm going to pause that thought for a minute.
I think motherhood is amazing. Motherhood scholarship coming. I'm just like, can I do this? Will I be able to do this?
You'll be absolutely fine.
Yeah, it's just like a new practice of balance.
It is. I've really enjoyed some readings as well on the male narrative, right, or the masculine narrative, that where you're allowed to speak uninterrupted, right, in a kind of speech kind of style, right, in the podium in front of people, where a lot of the women's stories through time, right, has been interrupted by children and cooking and other sorts of intrusions, and so they become a bit more piecemeal. Kind of have the task of putting them back together again. Really wonderful writings on that topic.
Yeah, it's like a new form of multitasking. I think women really created multitasking in that respect. Like, I can't tell you how many meetings I've had with the Australia crowd where they're like making dinner and we're like talking about these complicated theoretical things. Emma, are you ready to pick up?
I think the last word I said was relationality. Relationality and relationships, and that there can be reciprocal relationships between animate and inanimate beings. So earthkin also gets I like that. Thank you for bringing that to the group.
So Emma, for you, are the rocks part of the kinship group, or are they on their own sort of kin lineage there? Yeah. Okay.
Because they all have a different chemical signature, a different acidity, a different porosity and moisture capacity. There's so many different things that lead to what can be in relation with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't get away from, even though it's not, at least in our conceptualization, it's inanimate or not living, because it depends how we're measuring these things. We might reconceptualize it in a different way and actually consider it to be animate and agential and living, maybe.
Yeah, and we had talked, Elena and I, recently about the element of time and change, which are also not as clearly or really not so much expressed through the iceberg, and that can we, in a sort of more relational diagram, capture some kind of temporality? Certainly that does open up the space for the rocks to change, I mean, really long times, but I think I always am kind of coming back to, okay, what would we get from that, in terms of a conceptual or like a theoretical push, or what does it enable for us in our scholarship to add different parts and different elements to this image?
I think that's a good point. I just saw Siri and Isaac, maybe Siri first, and then Isaac turned their microphone on and off again.
Thanks, Elena. I had two thoughts actually from what you were just saying. One is I agree that rocks for the non-living earth should or could be part of this. Also in terms of ice, I've worked, as you know, from the NDS conference a lot with ice, and just its very dynamic nature, trying to navigate through ice-covered waters. It moves and changes and shifts, and it has sort of ways of behaving that becomes very interactive. I've certainly thought of ice as something that we can have some sort of kinship to. In terms of rocks, I think, when you have lichen, right? So like, they're not exactly, they're not mushrooms, I know, but they have parts of that to them. They're the ones that will first sort of render the minerals in the rock available, right? By disintegrating the surface, using that surface for minerals, and pieces it up and sort of makes other materials then available in the soil for plants and mushrooms to use. So in that sense, also as a source, I think it's relevant to have them included. I'm wondering, in terms of, you're looking for, and I have a question as well. I'm looking for, in this figure, you're wanting to have terms, right? Just like with the iceberg figure. So community sort of as the mushroom, and then a bunch of terms underneath. Did I understand that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's one way of, I think in my mind, that was kind of where we were ultimately headed, but it's really just a free form right now.
That was also a question I had for the group, but hadn't asked yet. In the iceberg, we are not drawing specific relationships that are happening in the economy. We're just writing the word. So I think that's a great point, Siri. Is that something that we want to do again here, or get rid of, or combine with drawings, and why? And yeah, it's a great question. Maybe
Emma, is there like a shortened version of your comment that you can put into a sticky or something? I was just about to put the whole thing into the image to save it, because I'm not really good at going back and looking at these chat strings. Sorry, Emma, Elena, you were saying something and I jumped
No, I
in.
was just going to toss the mic to Isaac and then Nikolai, I think. What was the order?
Actually, I just realized what I was going to say would have been a bit of a distraction. It wasn't related to the contents of the soil. It was a kind of follow on from what Stephen Healy was talking about this morning, which was framings that get you to think beyond like in the kind of like 100-year timeframes and things like that, as opposed to thinking 1 or 2 generations ahead. So yeah, we'll take back the economy. You have, I think there's 7-generation yardstick or something like that, but I don't know if that can be incorporated into this representation in any way. But you know, the time it takes for certain materials to have a presence in the soil. I mean, you could be talking about trash. You could be talking about oil in the soil and things like that, things that have composited over generations. That was just one thought. Another one, do you have like bugs and ants and things like that in the soil as well?
I mean, they certainly exist there. We don't have a conceptual role for them at the moment.
Okay, but yes, yeah, okay. I mean, we got worms, but yeah, I was just, as I say, it's just not my field. I'm not a biologist or a botanist or anything like that. But yeah, I was wondering if there would be wood lice and ants and things like that as well.
No, but I mean, that maybe is another way to sort of capture time and relationality is, you know, because if you have a slightly more stable network in a way, I don't know, of this mycelial network, but then you have these like little worms and bugs traveling through, you know, and so then they make their own kind of connections across whatever we have in the mycelia, you know, that there's a lot of potential, I think, for different ways to think about this. And also I think that, Cedar, your comment sort of made me think, you know, what does the figure look like in a terrestrial environment, which is what we're working on here in relation or in comparison to a marine figure. And because we had talked in the last session also about, you know, multiple figures that we could start to imagine for different purposes. And what, you know, in that respect, I think about what do different kinds of environments enable for us in different ways.
You know, to me, when I was listening to your talk a while back and I looked at your email, I had a bit of a different vision, I guess, that might be helpful or just confusing, but just put it aside. But, you know, in the same way as the tip of the iceberg, right, being the thing that we see, you know, the mushroom's the thing that we see, and we don't see everything that makes it up, right? This kilometer-wide network of mycelial networks, right? And that, you know, you can think of ourselves in the same way, right? Like, I am who I am, and I'm here and you can see me, but I am who I am because of an extensive network of social relationships, physical environments and experiences, right? That's under the surface and you can't see that. You know, you can think of climate change, right? You have this thing, climate change, and we talk about it and we see it, but and we devise policies to treat it, right? We need to lower emissions, for instance, but what if we paid attention to those vast, extensive networks of actions and ways of living and, you know, consumption patterns and so on that have created this thing called climate change? You know, then it sort of opens up other connections and other places to have attention on how we can change things, how we can, you know, influence this thing we call climate change, right? And that may be in the same way with, I'm not sure exactly how to play that with community, but what are those extensive sort of networks and characters, people, places that would make up, you know, that's more the vision I had in my mind of how a kind of mycelial figure it would look you know, and I don't, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm getting a slightly different understanding from the figure now, but I thought I'd share that anyway. That's helpful. Mm.
That makes me think of something that's come up before, and I'm just flipping through my old biology textbook now. I mean, this is like drawing a schematic or a diagram of ecosystems is something that has already happened in ecology. And yeah, I think that's just like Syria Common is just a great nudge to say, okay, what are we, just to remind or refine what the contribution of this specific drawing is. It's not, and maybe what the boundaries are. But I don't think the point is to just literally represent a specific ecosystem, right? And it's maybe more a metaphor, or yeah, it's more of a metaphor. And how is this metaphor something that we haven't seen before? Maybe that's a useful moment to think about who's using it and for what purposes.
Yeah, I mean, I can just mention that the idea of this figure originated from some of the feedback that Jackie and I received for our chapter for the handbook. And in that chapter, we talk about recognizing the labor of our earthkin, which we don't usually experience or interact with directly. So the chapter details 3 distinct kinds of relationships. One-to-one relationship of ants farming fungi or a specific fungus in their colonies, and the ways that it's sort of, we name it as like a mutualism or a mutualistic relationship. And because the fungus and the ants are basically both providing food for each other and also then helping each other in reproduction and supporting the young. And then we have a one-to-many example, which at the exact moment I'm kind of blanking on. And then we also have and then we have a many-to-many example. And in the many-to-many example, it's about how specific fungi live in different phases of forests as the forest develops over time and the species compositions change over time. The fungi change over time as well, but what's maybe less acknowledged or understood is how the fungi actually prepare the forest because of the types of decomposition that they do of the earlier species. They prepare the forest in some important ways for the later species, which are able to then settle because of the changes in nutrients composition. So that's a kind of a many-to-many, which I think we talked about as like gift labor. So in the chapter, in each of those 3 different types of relationships, which we put under the sort of metaphor, I tried to sort of develop what Jackie, who's a bioinformatician and an ecologist, brought in the idea of metabolic labor from biology. And I sort of adapted that with her towards something that was metabolic labor as we would understand it through diverse economies, and then put kind of a diverse economies language onto each one of those types of labor relationships of one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. And so at that point, somebody that read the piece, and I can't remember if it was, I think it was in the review stage, but at any rate said, you know, it would really be cool to make a figure. Could you make a mushroom figure that would talk about these relationships? So that's when I initially started thinking about this. And then that also then is the focus on the labor, which enables these different kinds of value exchanges. So where the iceberg really captures and names these discrete forms of value creation and value exchange, the sort of mushroom that we were envisioning would be more about the labor relationships. And in that piece also, and in some other work that I've done on this econo-ecology piece or concept, we've been trying to suggest that it's in a moment of sort of reciprocal labor, or you could say metabolic labor, but it's in the moment of like, it's in the moment of labor that the sustainability is chosen or rejected in a way. And so rather than looking at the result of the labor and determining, is this something that's sustainable? Is this end product sustainable or not? Sort of shift the focus of what is sustainable onto the exchange and the action and the relationship. And so for me, this is also part of why it's part of this place-based sustainability, because in that work, in the emplacement concept of in place sustainability, we're really thinking about sustainability as a dialogue and an ongoing process, and not something that is a solution or an end goal, the result of the right choices, but that it's this, embracing the complexity of it and our active role in it. And then I think with this work, we can extend that to the active roles and active work of our earth kin. Then we say it's in these relationships and in these moments of choices that we make that, we choose a sustainable path or we choose an unsustainable path. And so for me, this also has the sort of benefit of making me think about the responsibility that the choices involve. So for the figure, what I would like to have is a figure that very accessibly displays the complexity of who is involved in the community when I make these choices. I think that's part of what I'm after. Just so that, you can think, okay, my choice is going to have these, let me follow that choice down these paths. Yeah.
Right. And as a metaphor, perhaps not as a diagram.
Yeah, not a flow chart.
Literally, exactly.
Right. Yeah. Not something where it's like, if this, then that, Earth systems, social ecological change flow chart. No.
I think that's maybe that's also the reason that an illustration is quite useful, because I think there's so much that can be conveyed, or let's say you can convey complexity simply with the use of an image in a way that's harder in words. If you get a good artist behind it, perhaps, or set of brains.
Yeah, my thinking is that if it was not necessarily an abstract piece, but more like not specifically like a realist sort of approach to the system, that might be more effective, where some lines just trail off because we don't know, those kinds of things, or they're broken lines or whatever. Because I think there's a risk in it looking too literal, and people misinterpreting that. I know the poor iceberg has had too many really literal interpretations when it's supposed to be an heuristic, but people are like, oh, but the shape's wrong, it's heavy in the wrong place, and blah blah blah. It's like, it's not what it's about. But I think there's some kind of, I don't know, options there that might help.
Yeah, maybe that addresses some of Nikolai's points as well about feeling unbounded. If it can, in the style of the drawing, if it can show that this isn't the edge, there's no black line where there's water on the outside and iceberg on the inside, or this kind of thing. It's more of a watercolor style or something like this. That might be interesting.
So we have about 5 minutes left. I am wondering if folks have any sort of closing thoughts or where they'd like to see this work, or if they'd like to be involved in it, where to go from here is kind of what I'm thinking about. Oh, and I guess I would mention, although maybe, Siri, are you based in Norway? Yeah, sorry, I can't remember all the things. Just to mention that we have the summer winter school face-to-face Europe session will be in Trondheim this June, and that we are hoping for expressions of interest by November 18th for that, but that in the last session we had also talked about the potential for tagging on maybe a one-day workshop on this image idea, so that we have a kind of a timeline that we can, it always is very helpful for me at any rate to have kind of a end goal date or something that we could work on this image. I think there's good potential for that to be at least a hybrid event, but Kath Gibson will be here for the summer winter school. And I know she's keen to work on this figure as well. So that's something that is one possibility, is just to be adding a day around the school is June 20 to 29. So that would be kind of our target time to really be working as a community in a session to push this forward. Between now and then, I think there's some good work to be done. Making Kent, here away. Yeah. There's some scholars that you just keep coming back to, and your relationship changes with them over time. The other thing that I now was thinking about is that there's, I think, a really nice reading list that we could be compiling. So Elena has done amazing work working on, with this systematic literature review, but some really cool pieces have, I think, come up and been recommended as well in both sessions. So we might be sending a message. I think I probably will send a message out to the community asking for citations, just in case we haven't been able to capture them all in the sessions. And then we can distribute that list as well, then back out to the group. Prior, Latour's writing about the critical zone. What's that?
Is Prior still with us?
He's running the CEI. Yes.
Yep, I think that could also be part of the reading list, Isaac, because it refers to the biosphere, the thin layer between atmosphere and underground. Where we at the moment, so including the soil.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's the I see the representation as very generative provocation. I mean, as a device in that respect, and considering the critical zone and things as well, it's also a provocation to think more widely about the ethics of labor, both above the soil and below it. That would just be, my general observation of the utility of this tool as a provocation and generative tool for thinking differently.
Yeah. Provocation to think differently. I like it. That's what we're all here for, I think.
I thought maybe a concrete or the CERN Europe meeting. I'm sure there will be many ideas for that meeting now after Liviana, after this conference. But that could be the next moment where we kind of show people that didn't have the chance to be in these sessions are beautiful drawings. And maybe if there's a breakout group that wants to focus on that conversation, that could be a nice way of keeping it sort of alive between now and the summer school. So CD, that's like a monthly meeting with this community economies crew that are based in Europe. It's just a 1-hour Zoom meeting where we do check-ins, and if there's someone working on an idea that wants feedback, then they can bring that to the table and have a little working group on it.
I would love to have the link to that. I have some thoughts I'd like to share, if that's possible.
It sounds like, Elena, maybe we should be getting Siri into CERN.
Yeah, I was like, well, I think the next step is to get you into CERN then, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, please. I had not heard of this before, and I just had to look up what it stands for. So, but yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Siri, I can connect with you about that. It's a very short, you just have to send an email that says who you are and why you want to be a member, and have 2 people sign off that you're recommended as a member. So I think me and Za could do that, and I can organize that.
Yeah, and we're just I think maybe I haven't mentioned to you, Elena, maybe that also Marius, did I sell you? We got to get Marius in as well.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Let's
So
do
it's a STS scholar here at NTNU that is working with us on is working with me on that his idea of he's using sufficiency to think about sort of ways of we're trying to kind of, this is actually going to be for you too, Moy, like, because he's coming at it from a sort of a sufficiency angle, and I'm coming at it from the emplacement angle of both working then about rethinking what's inside the donut, what's inside Kate Raworth's Safe Spaces donut, and how can we unbox that and really dig into it a little bit more through ethical engagements and stuff. But yes, so I see we are at time, and I want to say thank you so much to everyone around the world for joining in, and hopefully we will be in touch. Keep an eye out for the emails in the list, and just shoot me an email with your follow-up thoughts or whatever. We're always happy to hear from you. Elena has a parting thoughts.
I'm just realizing that this is not the Europe crowd at all in the room. So maybe, do you guys have something in your time zone that you're doing as like a monthly check-in or anything like that from the Australia crew, New Zealanders?
We have a CERN Aotearoa group, and we're meeting once monthly at the moment, which is great. And we're actually just working through an Asia Pacific viewpoint special issue that is full of a lot of CERN articles, actually, things relating to diverse and community economies, which is great. Yeah, so we're
yeah, great. Okay, and maybe this is a good moment to say, like, what happens with the drawings now, and is it okay for everyone to use them and share them and get feedback throughout the network, and or what do you think? We all have access to this Jamboard now, so how should we use the access to this Jamboard?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was wondering about that actually after the last session, because I saw some people were hanging out in there. My gut instinct is actually to close the editing function, since they're sort of a specific product of a certain group of people. And I think that the conversation that we have as we are creating the Jamboards is an important element of that. So I think it's very fine for people to sort of take the images there and riff on them in their own space, but it's very much a product of collective work that I don't want any individual person to then start to really spin out. So yeah, I think that I'm glad you raised that, Elena, because I think that my preference would now be that they're no longer editable by everyone, but certainly that people can continue to visit them, to think with the material there. Yes, okay, I will stop the recording. And I think we're just about done. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, just from those that are still here, do folks want to sort of still have access to this, or, just wait for the message where I kind of compile what we've talked about and use that?
I'm happy to wait for a message from you about what you're doing with this. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. And I think we'll take that approach. Thank you. So I say good day to everyone, wherever you are. And yeah, until next time.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Okay.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.